Hello, so today I wanted to share my review on the book that I just recently finished called The Ghost of Eternal Polygamy by Carol Lynn Pearson. I'm excited to share this review because this definitely is one of those books that you read that changes the way you look at things. And it might kind of sound a little extreme, but I would say even changes your life. And that's what it did for me. I've never read a book that I related to or that validated me so much on a personal level. And so just from the get-go, I love this book. I think anyone who is curious, so I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And polygamy is part of our doctrine. It's not practiced by living people, but it is still part of the doctrine. And that has always been a pain point for me. And so anyone who is curious about delving into the doctrine a little bit more, or someone who doesn't necessarily understand why it causes other members of the church so much pain, this is a book that needs to be read, whether you're someone who does struggle with it and feels pain about it, or you're someone who doesn't get it, or doesn't get why people are hurt by it, and need to kind of educate yourself a little bit and read this, because honestly, there were so many moments in reading it that I felt so validated, because my own thoughts and feelings, especially my feelings, were being echoed. My relationship to polygamy, it's always been something kind of in the back of my brain. It's not something that I've ever liked the thought of, but certain circumstances have kind of just made me be like, okay, I need to be okay with it. One of those being that my grandparents, so my grandmother is my grandfather's second wife. His first wife passed away from polio. And years later, he met my grandmother and married her. And with the church's doctrine and current understanding of family relationships after death, that means that in heaven, my grandparents would be in a polygamous marriage. And so that's one of the reasons why I've always kind of just been like, I need to be okay with it. And if they're all okay with it, then great. But I've always kind of handled it from a distance. And then it was once I myself became married and started to kind of delve deeper into the doctrine through reading things like this, that I started to realize that it was not something I could believe in. So I guess that's just kind of getting straight to the point. It's not something that I believe in. It's not something that I believe is of God. As far as family relationships after death, I don't think any of us really know what heaven's going to be like. I think we can paint all these pictures and make all these speculations, but that's really all it is just speculations, and no one knows how anything's going to go down after death. And so for my own self, I'm not saying any friends, any family have to see it my same way, but for my own self, I do not believe it's of God. I don't believe a God who loves me would have this doctrine be so integral to life after death. And I think that's the thing that has bugged me most about it, is how its doctrine pertains to my life. This book also did touch on things that, as I learned about my church's history, that really were kind of traumatic for me to learn. I'd always known that early church leaders had multiple wives, but in my naive, maybe not naive, but just in my brain, it was like, oh, it was necessary so that everyone was taken care of, and it was really platonic and everything was fine. And as I learned some stuff, it really shook my world. And I've been able to come to also an okayness with that, in that I see those early church leaders almost as like King David type characters. It doesn't mean that they weren't called of God. It doesn't mean that they weren't prophets, but it does mean that they were imperfect and that they did make mistakes and that they were at fault in certain areas, and even at fault in areas that a lot of members of the church, and I think even like if you go onto the church's website, they say, oh, we as members are grateful for their sacrifice and understand their sacrifice or something. And it's like, I don't understand, and I don't think it was a necessary sacrifice. I don't think woman had to be the sacrificial. So I've heard it compared to where, God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, but then he stopped him before he actually had to sacrifice Isaac. They weren't stopped before women's hearts were broken, and Emma Smith's heart was broken. I think she was even quoted to say that she loved Joseph with a heart that he broke a long time ago. So anyway, all that is to say, a lot of that is addressed in this book. She does it from a very respectful standpoint, I feel. In fact, far more respectful than I would have been about certain things that were said, and especially certain things that were done. And so I loved it because she addressed it with respect. She still loves those early church leaders, but she's also very straightforward and honest about the facts. I've kind of glanced at other people's reviews on this book, and some of them are really in defense and against what Carolyn Pearson is saying. But as someone who has been hurt by the doctrine of polygamy and is scared of it and doesn't like it and doesn't feel that it's of God, this book was completely validating. And then off of that point, if you don't understand someone like me, you should read this book so that you can at least kind of see the perspective. One of my favorite things about this book was the sections called Other Voices. And so she has a section on a topic, and then at the very end, she'll have Other Voices, and it's responses from other people that she has surveyed or interviewed about their feelings on that same topic that she addressed in that chapter. And especially those sections would leave me in tears at times because they were echoing my very same feelings and fears. And so those are just a few of the reasons that I really love this book, and I think so many people should read it. So another thing about this book, it didn't start this in me, but it's definitely confirmed and validated some of these thoughts for me. I definitely used to be a member of the church that would say, like, oh, I don't ever want the priesthood. That's, I don't need it. Women's power is in other things. Or, oh, we don't talk about our mother in heaven like we do our Father in heaven because she's too sacred, or because we don't want her name being blasphemed. And all of these things, like I definitely used to say those things. And not since reading this book, but in the past year or so, just as I've been studying and kind of taking a more critical approach to theology and doctrine, I've started to change my thoughts on that and just kind of change my own tune. And this confirmed and validated those things to me. As far as like the priesthood goes, maybe it would be more okay or more acceptable if we called it like the priestesshood. And with Mother in Heaven, she's a goddess. If you believe in a Father in heaven, well, naturally, there's got to be a Mother in heaven. And I don't think anything that mortal humans can say or do could take away from her power and divinity. And I think I could go on forever about how important culturally it is to have developed theology on female deity. But anyway, she has a section in the book that talks about Heavenly Mother, and I really love it. The same author, actually, I read a collection of poems that she wrote called Poems to Mother God, or Finding Mother God, something like that. And I loved all of them, and she includes some of them in here, but I love the section on Heavenly Mother, and especially as I learn more about female deity and the concept of a mother in heaven, that's part of the reason that I've kind of become more like, well, why don't the women have some sort of official priestesshood? In the early church, women did give blessings of healing, but for some reason we don't anymore. And it's shocking to me that we believe in a creation and everything being produced just from male deities. And I believe it's in this book that she says it, but she's like, when was the last time that you ever saw a man give birth? And so that's not to say that they aren't integral and important part of a creative process, but women are integral to creation. So perhaps we don't talk about Mother God because doing so would bring into question how much spiritual power and authority women do have. Those are just some thoughts that I have had lately. To kind of finish off, or not finish off, but to share some sections of the book that I really loved, I'll just read some portions just so you can get a little sampling of what this book is about. So she wrote a poem called Somewhere I've a Mother There. And I love this poem because it's talking about how I read it is kind of like our time in church, or church and how it directs us in our spirituality, and just what the lack of mother really feels like for a lot of people. So it says, I live in a motherless house, a broken home. How it happened, I cannot learn. When I had words enough to ask, where is my mother? No one seemed to know. And no one thought it strange that no one else knew either. I live in a motherless house. They are good to me here, but I find that no kindly patriarchal care eases the pain. I yearn for the day someone will look at me and say, you certainly do look like your mother. I walk the rooms, search the closets, look for something that might have belonged to her, a letter, a dress, a chair. Would she not have left a note? I close my eyes and work to bring back her touch, her face. Surely there must have been a motherly embrace. I can call back for comfort. I live in a motherless house, motherless and without a trace. Who could have done this? Who would tear an unweaned infant from its mother's arms and clear the place of every souvenir? I live in a motherless house. I lay awake and listen, always for the word that never comes but might. I bury my face in something soft as a breast. I am a child, crying for my mother in the night. And then this other bit that I'm going to read as well also relates to the whole Heavenly Mother section. Eternal polygamy turns my Heavenly Mother into a sort of amorphous crowd, indistinct, unknowable, fading into obscurity. When I try to imagine a heaven with one reigning patriarch surrounded by many wives, my mind and soul descend into darkness, doubt, and confusion. Trying to reconcile the idea of eternal polygamy, which deeply offends my heart and spirit, with my belief in a loving Heavenly Father has been a struggle for me during much of my life, and at times has distanced me from him and my husband and left me feeling depressed, worthless, and angry. That's a scary, dark place to be. Ultimately, I realized that either my belief in God or my belief in polygamy had to go. They were mutually incompatible. I was not capable of believing in the God of polygamy because he was no God I would ever want to worship. For me, the divine picture only comes into focus when I know the glorious reality of one Heavenly Mother who embodies every power and perfection in her female form and stands side by side with my Heavenly Father in wisdom, love, authority, and counsel. President David O. McKay often quoted this statement by Reverend Theodore Hesburgh. The most important thing a father can do for his children is to love their mother. No amount of telling me that Heavenly Father loves his daughters just as much as he loves his sons rings true to me until I feel for myself that the way he loves my mother, my assurance of the love my heavenly parents have for me, and my trust in their plan of happiness flow directly from my understanding of the even deeper love and partnership they share with one another. Just even reading that gives me chills, because especially that little part where it says the best thing that a father can do for his children is to love their mother. How could that not apply to our Heavenly Father and how he feels for our Heavenly Mother? I think there are so many other things of this that I want to share. However, I think it'll just be best if I end with saying that I love this book. There was an analogy in it where it said, there's been a heavenly earthquake. And that's certainly how I've felt recently, is that just kind of my understanding of the spiritual, the metaphysical of heaven has had an earthquake. And what I can do now is pick up the pieces and one by one ask myself, does this have God's loving fingerprint on it? And if it doesn't, I don't have to rebuild my understanding of heaven with it. And so, just like the author of this book, that's what I'm doing with polygamy. To me, it does not have the fingerprint of a loving deity on it, of a loving God. And so that's not going to be part of what I build my beliefs and my heart around. So please read this book. There were moments in it where I read things that either Joseph Smith or Brigham Young said that I was so angry at, and I cannot believe they were said. But like I said, she handles it with grace, and the book left me feeling so validated, so loved, and like I was my own spiritual authority. So with that being said, I hope you read this. If you already have, please leave comments down below on your thoughts. If you completely disagree with me, that's okay. You can leave a comment and we can talk about it. Please make sure to like this video and definitely subscribe to this channel. It helps me immensely, and I would appreciate it so much. So I hope to see you around. I hope you stick around, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.